and staff of R.C. Lipscomb Elementary School. I'm Dr. Betty Hyatt. I'm the coordinator for the filming of this documentary video about Mr. R.C. Lipscomb, the man for whom your school is named. I will also moderate the panel discussion in which we will bring out facts and musings about this man for your better understanding of who he was and what he stood for. First, let me begin by introducing or asking our panel members to introduce themselves to you. We have a panel of students representing all of you from this school who will ask the questions that you most frequently wanted to ask about Mr. Lipscomb. Will you begin by telling us your name, the grade you're in, and your teacher, please?
My name is Leslie Jones, and I'm in 5th grade, and I'm in Miss Young's class.
I'm Jessie Boyer, and I'm in Mrs. Parker's class, and I'm in 3rd grade.
I'm Danny Jo Baggett, and I'm in Mrs. Coe's 4th and 5th grade class.
I'm Brett Delightly.
Who's your teacher, Brett?
My teacher is Miss Gunnan, and I'm in kindergarten.
My name is Carly. I'm in 4th grade, and I'm in Miss Buck's class.
My name is Lindsay Jones. I'm in 4th grade, and I'm in Mr. Rowe's class.
Now I'd like the members of our adult panel who will respond to these students' questions to introduce themselves by telling you their name and their relationship to Mr. Lipscomb, how they knew him, beginning with Mrs. Brewster.
I'm Robbie Estes Brewster. I was the sister of Mr. Lipscomb's wife, Lenny Estes. I'm just retired. I'm not anything now. I'll turn it over to Mr. Pope.
Hi, I'm Tom Fulford, and I belong to the Cantonment Rotary Club, which Mr. Lipscomb was a member for many years. I'm also a member of the Gonzales Methodist Church, which Mr. Lipscomb was a member for many years.
Thank you.
And my name is Roger Mott. I first knew Mr. Lipscomb when he was the general supervisor of the district, and I was a teacher at Warrenton Junior High School. But then later on, I worked with Mr. Lipscomb. He was my immediate boss. He was deputy superintendent, and I was assistant superintendent at the time. I enjoyed working with him very much.
Ms. Archer?
I'm Christine Archer, and today I'm representing Marie Pierce. We were all neighbors and attended the Gonzales United Methodist Church together. In fact, he was my Sunday school teacher for a few years, and then later I taught his son. I was his Sunday school teacher.
Mr. Butler?
I'm Reginald Butler. I taught under Mr. Lipscomb, Pensacola High. Never ran into a man that was quite like him. He was the finest fellow I've ever known at that point. But I later taught his son, gave him a 0 in citizenship on a computer when they said they couldn't do it. But we still got along very well. He was a wonderful man.
Mr. Thompson?
I'm Charlie S. Thompson. I'm a student of RC's class. I've been in his class ever since I've been there, since 1952. He was a fine man. I played golf with him. He helped me work on the church. And I never will forget the remarks of when he was playing golf and he was jumping over the fence to help get the ball for a man, and come to find out he thought he was older than he was, but he was the man that he's doing was 5 years older than him.
Thank you all, and we're looking forward to the panel discussion to follow. At this time, I'd like to introduce a person who's no stranger to you, the principal of R.C. Lipscomb Elementary School, to make a few introductory remarks. Ms. Ennis?
Thank you, Dr. Todd. R.C. Lipscomb Elementary School is a very special school. It's a special place for boys and girls. But it was named after a very special person. Mr. Lipscomb was admired and respected by everyone that knew him. And I want you to know why they admired him and why they respected him and liked him so. I want you to be proud of your school and proud that it was named after Mr. Lipscomb.
I believe these boys and girls have a question for you, Ms. Ennis.
All right.
Miss Ennis, how did you get to know Mr. Lipscomb?
Well, when I was much younger, in the first year I was a principal, I was really frightened to be a principal. And I didn't know many of the answers about how to be a principal. And I had many questions to ask, and I'd called a number of people at the district level, but I always got the best answers from Mr. Lipscomb. He always had an answer for me. I was young, and I was afraid of asking questions sometime, as you are, but Mr. Lipscomb was always so nice to me. He made me feel very comfortable, and he was always a gentleman. He always had an answer. And I'd say, Mr. Lipscomb, this is the problem, and I'm not so sure what to do. And he'd say, well, Joan, what do you think? And I'd tell him what I thought, and then most of the time he'd say, that's a good idea, that's good thinking, and he'd pat me on the back and tell me to go ahead with it. And other times when he would have good advice to keep me out of trouble, he'd say, well, have you thought about doing this? But he would laugh about it. He always returned my calls, and he was always made me feel like he was so glad that I called him. I really admired Mr. Lipscomb. He made my life as a new principal, so much easier.
Thank you, Ms. Ennis. When we ask you to submit questions that you would like to have answered about Mr. Lipscomb, there were many questions you had about his early life, whether or not he had a family of his own, what he did, what kind of things he enjoyed. So to answer many of these questions, I've asked his sister-in-law, Mrs. Robbie Brewster, to give you a biographical sketch. Would you come do that at this time, Mrs. Brewster? And then these boys and girls have 2 or 3 questions for you when you get through.
Might not be able to answer. I knew Mr. Lipscomb about 50 years before his death. And I do want to tell you a few things that I observed from the long time of being with him and around him. And in all those 50 years, I never saw him lose control. No matter what situation came up, he was able to handle it, and handle it with intelligence and with patience. And it was a great privilege to be a relative, even though it was an in-law. He was born November the 2nd, 1910 in North Alabama. He lived on a farm. When he was very young, he lost his father. And then a few years later, he lost his only sister. So it was just Mr. Lipscomb and his mother. He helped to run the small farm all the time that he was in school. Because he was very intelligent, a great student, he won a scholarship to a college named at that time Birmingham Southern. In order to help the scholarship sustain him in the school, he waited on tables in a boarding house, and therefore he got meal tickets so he could eat free. Also, to make a little extra money, he did something that you young people wouldn't understand. At bowling alleys at that time, they had to have someone to put the pins back up after the bowler knocked them down. And he had that job, to put the pins back up. Now, of course, you know, it's all done by automation. But in that time, it made him a little extra money to put the pins up. I tell you this to let you know that he was determined to get an education, and he was determined to be self-reliant because his mother was a widow and he had no other family. However, he lived very close to his grandfather, and he gave the grandfather credit for helping him form his character, which indeed was a great character. Later on, after World War II, because he was in the school personnel, he did not have to join he wasn't drafted, but he volunteered and went in the Navy. And he served in the Navy until the war was over. He came home in the middle of a school year, so he did some substitute teaching in Milton High School until the new school year, and then he got a full teacher job or a principal job. I always admired him because he could roll with the punches. And when life gave him lemons, according to the old expression, he made lemonade. And he was very good at making the lemonade. There's a poem by Rudyard Kipling that someday you will have in school. It's called If. And there's a little line or two in there that describes his personality. If you can walk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch. And Mr. Lipscomb could talk with the most educated person, and then he was very comfortable with young people, with high school students. He was just comfortable wherever he was, whatever the situation was. I saw him be a leader in the church, in the community, in the Rotary Club. Whenever he was needed, he was there. In all the 50 years, I never heard him say no to any request for any kind of help. On the other hand, he was very reluctant to ask anybody to help him. And once in a while, he needed help so badly that he would call on me. But it had to be very, very necessary. He hated to bother anybody, though everybody bothered him. He had 5 in-laws, brothers and sisters of his wife, Lenny. And the slogan for the whole family was called RC. No matter what came in, if your house was broken into, call RC. That was our slogan. And we all called him, and he never said no. He could conduct the services wherever in the church community he belonged. He was on a lot of state committees in the field of education. And yet, I must tell you another side of him. When his wife was very ill and not expected to live, he took such beautiful care of her. I have been to the home, and I could smell cornbread cooking, or those little custard cups. He was baking some little custards for her. He was just at ease making the custard and the cornbread. Some lady brought us some custard cups, and he got the recipe, and he was making the custard cups, and I would come in and he would show them to me in the oven, and they were just cooking. To know R.C. was to admire him, respect him, and love him. The expression was that he was an unusual man because all of his in-laws loved him, and we did. We admired him, we respected him, and we loved him. Mr. Lipscomb was a Christian, a gentleman, and an educator. He had been a student, teacher, principal, deputy superintendent. I feel sure when he heard the voice of God that God said to him, "Well done, thy good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of the Lord." A young man told me that he had talked to many Catholic students, Catholic high students, and they said that they certainly admired Mr. Lipscomb because he could correct them without demeaning them. And he just had a way with young people. I talked to one of my sons who lives in Tallahassee, and he was very close to Mr. Lipscomb. Mr. Lipscomb was almost a second father to my son. And he said, "Mother, be sure to tell them that Mr. Lipscomb was a great role model." He said he certainly was a great role model. And also remind them that, like the poem, If, he could walk and talk with kings, and yet he never lost the common touch. Let's see. I do want to tell you how much he enjoyed life. He really enjoyed life. We had many laughs together. He played golf, and he bowled, and the bowling instructor at the bowling alley said he did everything wrong as far as the rules of bowling, but he got a good score, so she was going to let him alone and not bother him. I think maybe he played golf maybe about like he bowled. He had his own system, and it was a good system, so nobody changed him. Then I want to close with a little quotation from the Psalm of Life by Longfellow, which you will also study one day. It said, lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. And I will assure you that if you were to follow Mr. Lipscomb's footprints, they would certainly lead you the right way. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Mrs. Brewster. That was really wonderful, but don't leave yet. These boys and girls, you left out 2 or 3 things. Well, you can answer them from there. You left out 2 or 3 things that they really wanted to know about Mr. Lipscomb, and I'm going to let them ask you those questions now.
What was his favorite subject, and did he have a favorite teacher?
He was very good at all the subjects. He could teach the physics and the chemistry and the science. I don't know anything he couldn't teach, honey. Now, do you mean a favorite teacher in the school while he was principal or educator, or do you mean while he was growing up?
While he was growing up.
Growing up, honey, I do not know. I did not know him when he was in Alabama. I didn't know him until he came to Crestview, Florida, where he met my sister.
But did he not have an aunt who was a teacher?
He had
that
an
a
aunt
great
that was a
influence over
teacher,
his
yes.
life? Okay. And we have another question for you.
Did he play or coach sports?
He coached football. During the war, see, so many men had been drafted that he had to do a lot of different things, and he coached football. And I was told that he coached girls basketball because there was nobody else to do it. And he took a lot of teasing about coaching the girls basketball team. But he was the kind of person that would try to do anything that was needed to be done, whether it was cooking or coaching basketball girls.
Brett has a question for you, which you've already answered, but I think you need to give the answer again because this is very important to the boys and girls here at Lipscomb. Brett?
When is Mr. Lipscomb's birthday? We like to have a party for him every year.
When was his birthday?
It was November the 2nd. November the 2nd. And I always remembered real well because my first granddaughter was born on his birthday. I had all grandsons, and I finally got a little granddaughter, and she was born on Mr. Lipscomb's birthday, November 2nd.
Thank you, Ms. Brewster, and thank you, boys and girls, for your questions. The next question will be answered by Mr. Butler, and we're ready to ask it.
Why was our school named for him, and who decided to name the school after him?
The school board finally made the decision, but as soon as this school was up for nomination for a name, a number of teachers, quite a number of teachers, and students who had either taught for Mr. Lipscomb for a number of years, or those that went to school under him, started calling the school board members and made them aware that there was an awful lot of people who were going to be very upset who wasn't named after him. He was one of the finest men that I know.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Ms. Archer, do you have something to add to that? Wasn't there a community effort made to get the school named for him?
I remember that it got down between 2 individuals, RC and another one, and I got a petition and got a lot of signatures on it. And when it got to the school board, they said that swung the ballot for RC. And I was happy to have a part in that.
Thank you both for those answers. The next question we will ask, the children will ask, will be responded to by Ms. Archer first and then Mr. Thompson. And we're ready for the question.
What was his personality like? What kind of person was he?
First, let me say it's a real privilege to be here, not only to speak about RC, but to represent Marie Pierce, who could not be here. But before she left for Ohio, she told me some facts about him that when I give you those facts that she left, you will probably be able to get a good picture of what kind of a person he was. She knows a lot of facts about people that they don't know she knows sometimes. First, she told me that he, to the Pensacola Blood Bank, honored him because he was a multi-gallon donor. Now that really speaks of a person who loves life and loves individuals. And then another thing she said, she was impressed with the way he took time for people. As she was growing up, even when they only had one car, that he would stop by and pick them up with all their books and everything going to Sunday school. So she remembered that about him. And also he and Lenny, his wife, subsidized a lot of retired teachers whose retirement didn't quite meet their needs. And he continued that after Lenny had passed away. And he wrote many letters of recommendation for students for scholarships and for positions, employment. And he and Lenny helped at least a dozen students go to college, even though he only had one son, Bobby. And that was a real wonderful characteristic. He was a very neat and orderly man. He had beautiful blue eyes. And he always looked so neat, and I'm going to tell you a secret. His wife, Lenny, was a precious friend of mine, too. And she told me one time that she went in every morning, went to the closet, and laid out his suit, his tie, and his shirt, and that's why he was so perfectly matched. So I thought you would enjoy knowing that.
He was colorblind.
Mr. Thompson, would you like to add to this?
He's colorblind. You didn't know how to match it.
I didn't know
And
that.
I remember a time when we was playing golf and his wife had asked me to buy him a number 2 wood. That's what the golf season, I bought it for him and gave it to him, and we went out to, we played St. Regis then, and we teed off, and he knocked the ball and won from the tee. And that was the reason. He said, I'm going to, and as long as he played golf, he played that it's amazing.
I'd like to mention a word about his clothes. I realized that his wife picked out his clothes. He told me that one time, and he was well coordinated, but also she picked out good clothes for him. They were always well coordinated, but he wore his clothes well too. He was a slender person, and his clothes always looked so well on him. He looked like he was stepped out of a fashion box every day that he came to work. And he always looked very professional on the job.
I worked for RC for quite a few years, got to know him very well. One of the things that impressed me is I received a telegram one day. He had no idea what it was. He brought it up to the room and says, "Do I need to relieve you? I can teach chemistry." But it wasn't. It was an offer for going to school that summer. But I think he was one of the finest men I ever worked for. This includes my father. He was always about the school. That was his one purpose. And any ideas that would upgrade that school to help those students, he was 100% behind it. And I just never met a man quite like them. He just was never wrong.
Thank you, Ms. Butler. The next question we have will be answered by Mr. Fulford, and we're ready for the question.
Was he a big man? How tall was he? Is he famous?
Let me answer it this way. Was he a big man? I think Mr. Lipscomb was about average size, about 5 feet, 10 inches. And I would say he weighed around 150, 155 or so. So it's about an average in size. Was he famous? Well, not in a sense that you would think of Columbus or George Washington, but he was well known and respected throughout this entire area. All people who come in contact with him in Northwest Florida and Alabama, they knew of him and respected him. So in this respect, in terms of the school system, in terms of what he contributed to his community, to his country, to his fellow man, he was famous. Yeah. And what was the other part there?
I think
You said, was he big? Not in terms of, not like Magic Johnson, the basketball player, or Mike Ditka, or the refrigerator that played professional football. But Mr. Lipscomb didn't have to be big for what he was known for. He was an educator. Most people, not only the students, the people who come in contact with him, whether it be in the school system, in his church, what, kind of looked upon him as for advice. He was their mentor, whether he was officially assigned as such or not, but they always asked for Mr. Lipscomb's advice and assistance. And he was knowledgeable in so many things. Matter of fact, when he came into a room, you would probably view him as your grandfather. You would immediately admire him and respect him for what he was. Does that answer your question? Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Fulford. The next question will be responded to by Mr. Butler. Mr. Roy L. Hyatt was supposed to be here today to help answer this question. He could not come, so he sent his notes, and Mr. Butler will make those the response for the question. We're ready for the question?
What kind of principal was he?
Well, Mr. Hyatt states, when I knew Mr. Lipscomb at PHS, he was the #1 Tiger. That was the mascot of the thing. He was very proud of his team. Had a right to be. They'd whip just about anybody, not just in this area, but in most of the United States that would play us. He was a principal leader who had a respect of students, staff, and the entire community. There was nobody that did not respect R.C. on what he did. He was a man with unquestionable integrity, who worked well with individuals, and he knew them by name to understand and to resolve any problems as they arose. He always had credible for advice and assistance to the students, teachers, and parents. He worked with other community leaders throughout the organization to create the best educational environment possible at PHS. He asked, like sports, but was especially proud of the academic program that we had at PHS. I don't think there's any way to put in words what he really did or said. He built up the programs in that area tremendously from the time he got there.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. The next question will be responded to by Dr. Mott, and we're ready for the question.
What did Mr. Lipscomb do for education as an administrator? Was he respected and liked by teachers, parents, and students?
Well, I suppose the greatest thing he did as an administrator was to give a lot of leadership to the educational program in Escambia County. I never knew him as a teacher, but by the way, I am sure that he must have been a great teacher. I'll bet you would have liked him as a teacher. I knew him, first of all, as a general supervisor. That was a long time ago, before we ever had assistant superintendents in the Escambia County school system. He was the general supervisor, and which was pretty much the same job as an assistant superintendent at the time. He was over all of the operations of the school district. And then he moved from that job to principal of Tate High School, I believe. And I recall that in working with Mrs. York, I was at Tate High School at one time, and I remember how much Mrs. York, who was his secretary, how well she thought of him. And she told about a system that Mr. Lipscomb put in at Tate High School that was used for registering students. You know, when you start a new school year, you get students from a lot of elementary schools, and a lot of the middle schools that come in there new, and you have to get all of those students in 6 different classes during the day, And so that takes a lot of doing. Well, Mr. Lipscomb had developed a card system for doing that. And we still use that card system when I was at Tate, my first year at Tate High School. It was a system that Mr. Lipscomb had developed for registered students. We changed it during the year when automation came along, but we started out, we were still using his system at the time that I got there. And then, now I recall Mr. Lipscomb as principal of Pensacola High School, and he was principal during a time when we had, Pensacola High School was on double session. It was a time when the number of students in the district were growing like leaps and bounds, and Pensacola High School was on double session. They literally had classes in broom closets, big broom closets, but they used every available space. But I remember that Pensacola High School was as clean as any school I've ever seen. The floors were always shining when he was a principal there. And then later on, he became the first deputy superintendent for the school district. He went from Pensacola High School to the school board office. The district was growing and growing and getting more and more students. We were building more and more schools throughout Escambia County. And he moved from Pensacola High School to the county office as deputy superintendent. He remained in that job until he retired, and that's where I worked with him. And I would say that, and I had lots of good bosses during the time that I was in the school business. All of my principals and all of the superintendents that I worked for, and a couple of deputy superintendents that I worked for, and I'm like Mr. Butler. R.C. Lipscomb was my favorite boss, and I had good bosses, but R.C. Lipscomb was my favorite boss. He was the nicest person in the world to work for. Never heard him say anything derogatory about a person. I never heard him run a person down. He was usually saying nice things about people. Now, one of the jobs of an administrator at that level is to evaluate the performance of other people. And behind closed doors in the most professional setting, I've heard him say some things about a person's performance, but never anything about the person himself, you know. And that was a great characteristic of R.C. Lipscomb, as far as I'm concerned. He was a great person to work for. He was a great person to be around. I remember going on a trip with him to Miami once, and we roomed together. He was my boss, but it was like rooming with another person that worked the same job, you know. That was R.C. Lipscomb. I think that to answer your question, that the greatest thing he did during the years that I knew him was to give the kind of leadership to the school district that it needed. And did teachers like him? Yes, they liked him. By the way, I remember a teacher talking about his blue eyes. You know, she was an elementary teacher, but she remembered what deep blue eyes that Mr. Lipscomb had. Yes, I never heard a teacher say anything bad about him or derogatory about him. And I think that he was as well liked as any person that I know in or out of education, actually.
Thank you, Dr. Mott. The last question is an open question, so any of you may respond to this. All we ask is that you take turns. The last question, Brett?
Do you know any funny stories about Mr. Lipscomb?
I know.
Do you know any funny stories about Mr. Lipscomb?
I know a funny story about Mr. Lipscomb that would be funny to we adults. It might not be funny to you, but once when Mr. Lipscomb was principal at Pensacola High School, someone had asked him to let the band play in a parade, march in a parade that they were interested in. And Mr. Lipscomb, that was back when a principal had a chance to make policy decisions about most anything. And Mr. Lipscomb did not see how the band could march in this parade. And this man began to argue with Mr. Lipscomb. He says, well, I remember that that you let the band march in a parade for Vince Webbs. Vince Webbs, the past mayor of Pensacola, I think was on the city council at that time, and he was probably chairman of something like the Fiesta Committee or something like that, which was a a community effort, and the band had marched in that parade. This man was complaining about, you know, he marched in his parade, I want him to march in my parade. Mr. Lipscomb said, argued with him as long as he could, then finally he says, well, I'll just have to tell you something else. Says, Mr. Whibbs lets me have a new Pontiac every year. And the man says, oh, well, then I understand. That would be funny to us, because I doubt if Mr. Lipscomb ever took a ballpoint pen from the school.
He did.
You know.
I think that Mr. Butler has a story similar that may be funnier to adults, particularly to school teachers, than to the students of R.C. Lipscomb Elementary School. But Mr. Lipscomb, would you like to tell us about the library incident?
Mr. Lipscomb needed the library enlarged, and we had a dead-end hall that went between it and another room. And he tried to get them to take that wall out so they could get in some more books for the students. And they told him they couldn't. It was a load-bearing wall. So he told all of his assistant principals to wear their old clothes the next day to school. And they all showed up the next day at school and he gave them a sledgehammer. They knocked that wall out, and then he called up and says, these bricks are out here in the way. These students are going to fall and get hurt. You better come and get them. Now, I also heard another story about stuff that went on up there, too. The chorus every year had to get money when they wanted to get out of town. So they were selling candy. And they were selling it at an exorbitant price, and it was cheap candy. And this woman called up and says, this candy is horrible that y'all are selling. And Mr. Lipscomb says, you didn't eat that stuff, did you, lady? She says, yes, I did. He said, well, we're selling to make money, not to eat.
Can anyone top that one?
No, I
Mr.
can't.
Thompson?
I'd like to respond to, went to the Montgomery to the meeting of election preachers, and somehow or another, Lenny, his wife, had packed his clothes and everything, and you know, he went off and left his clothes. He didn't have a change of clothes or nothing. And he said, when he got back, he told us, voted it up at the board meeting. He says, you know one thing? Says, this is the slickest pair of pants I've ever had, from sliding backwards and forwards.
He took his suitcase, but he had his suits in a suit bag, and it was in the closet with the door shut. And she never knew he went off with that. He took a suitcase, but not his suits. She never did know that. If she had ever opened that closet door and had seen those, she was the kind of person who would have gotten in the car and gone to Montgomery taking them to. She often had to take his keys, his watch, his wallet to school, because he had one fault. He was absent-minded, and she's had to carry his clothes many, many times.
I'd like to say one more thing. It's not
Okay.
funny, but Mr. Lipscomb had such pride in Pensacola High. If the county would not come down and mow the grounds or any part of it, he brought his tractor from home, put on his old clothes, and got out there and mowed, and that was a tremendous acreage that he had to mow. And he kept that place up. He didn't mind getting a paintbrush. He never asked anyone to do anything that he would not get in there and do himself.
When he was principal of Pensacola High, they were having a big ball game on Friday night, and he took my youngest son, and all my children went to Tate High School. So here's my youngest son sitting with the principal of Pensacola High in the Pensacola High section. And everybody, of course, Tate was losing, and there was nothing to yell for Tate. But my Jimmy said, Uncle R.C., when did we yell for Tate? And R.C. got the biggest kick out of that. Here he was going to yell for Tate in the Pensacola High section. That's how much my children loved Tate. About the clothes, do let me say this. I would go shopping with my sister many times, but I did not like to go with her to Orton's to pick out Mr. Lipscomb's suits. We looked at every suit in Orton's store. We laid every shirt on that suit. We laid every tie on that suit. It took us an hour or two to pick out one matching outfit for him.
We did a good job of it. Mr. Lipscomb made another contribution to Pensacola High School one time that I can tell you about now, that it was happened 30 years ago. I asked him for a job as assistant principal there, and he didn't hire me, which showed he had very good judgment. And I recall him saying, well, you know, Roger, I might hire you, but it would take you a year just to get on the faculty. And so we went on to other things. But
Any other funny stories?
One thing I can relate to what Mr. Lipscomb told me about his childhood experience. When he was about your age, he used to go swimming in a little creek. Back then, they did not have swimming pools in areas, particularly up in Alabama where he was raised. They didn't have the accommodations that you may have now. And there were no beaches around. So he would actually go swimming in this place, and he was describing it to a friend of his, how big this place was he was swimming, and that how he almost drowned there one time, and how deep it was. So he took this friend on a trip up to Alabama to see this stream and the swimming hole when he was a kid. And so when they looked at it, the fellow says, you know, with a running start, I can jump over it. It wasn't nearly as large as he envisioned.
I think Mrs. Brewster has a little story about when Mr. Lipscomb wanted to play football as a youngster.
Oh, Betty had to do his farm work. Yes, his mother said that he could play football if he kept his schoolwork up and all the farm chores up. And he did not have an easy life. He wasn't born with that silver spoon in his mouth like the governor of Texas spoke about George Bush. It certainly wasn't a silver spoon.
I want to thank each of our distinguished panel members here today. You've made a wonderful contribution to this video, and I certainly do appreciate the effort of these students. They've done a great job of asking their questions and of being very patient and listening most earnestly and with interest to the respondents' answers. Students of R.C. Lipscomb Elementary School, I hope this panel discussion about the facts and musings of the man for whom your school is named helps you to know him better and to be challenged to live your life by the example he set for us all. To be hardworking, honest, helpful, and caring. To have a good sense of humor. To be a good family member and a responsible citizen. To do your duty to God and your country, and to be a good friend to others. Thank you.